welcome to the interview today with Sean Wheelock from Bellator MMA. I'm Steve Jewin from MMA Mania. Sean, thank you so much for joining us.
Steve, it's great to be back with you. Thank you for having me.
Is This Legal? The book that you worked on with Art Davie. As you said yourself, it's not just Bellator, it's the sport as a whole. And would we even have this sport without Art Davie? I don't know.
Well, I really appreciate it. Yeah, so our book is called Is This Legal? It's available at Barnes & Noble, but I'll be really candid. Your best price is on AngryMarks.com. Book list for $24.95. You can get it for about $18, I think, on Amazon. And I think the ebook, the download, is only something like $8 or $8.50. Amazon has the best prices. So where you buy it doesn't matter to me, but I would encourage people to get it on Amazon just to save yourself a couple of books. This book is the story of Art Davie in creating the UFC. And it's not a sweeping history of the UFC. It's not Art Davie's biography or autobiography. It's his first-person memoir of essentially the 4 years of his life with a little bit of backstory of how he created the UFC. Art Davie was an advertising executive. He had a company called Wisdom Imports as one of his clients. Wisdom Imports, one of their brands was Tecate. They imported Tecate for the U.S. market. Art Davie pitched them on this style versus style martial arts event, thinking that would be a good thing for them to sell Tecate beer. Right. They passed. Art Davie wound up quitting his job. He's very, very entrepreneurial, and then spent the next 4 years of his life from the fall of 1989, culminating on November 12th, 1993, in creating the UFC. Started off calling it the world's best fighter, became more the world's, and then ultimately the Ultimate Fighting Championship. And in our book, we detail everybody who came. He picked up the Gracie family, picked up the Academy Award nominated screenwriter and the guy who directed Conan the Barbarian. Semaphore Entertainment Group, Bob Meyerowitz, who wound up after UFC 5 buying the UFC from Art Davie and Rorion Gracie and their investors. It's a book of total honesty. And Art Davie is an extremely close friend of mine, very important person in my life. And Steve, I always tell people the book came out of our friendship. Our friendship didn't come out of the book. But with that being said, and because we're very, very close, I told Art, if I'm going to do this book with you, I'm only going to do it with the condition that we're honest. We're not going to tell half-truths. We're not going to fabricate. We're going to put every detail in. So you see original faxes, documents. We tell you how much people got paid, how much people made. We quote from contracts. Anything and everything that you wanted to know is in there. And the reason is because I wanted to know all these questions. So as we're writing this book, I'm peppering Art Davie with questions. How did you find the Gracies? Why did you fight in Denver, Colorado? Where did Taylor Tooley come from? Why didn't you get a college wrestler? Any and every possible question. How much did people get paid? How much did you make? How much did this cost? It's all in the book. And it's the story of the creation of the first Ultimate Fighting Championship.
Well, let me offer this statement, not necessarily intended as an endorsement, but it may come off like one anyway.
Oh, I'll take an endorsement, please. I highly respect you. You have great respect in the MMA community, so I'll take an endorsement for sure.
Well, let me say two things then. First is that when I started reading the book, I couldn't put it down. The only reason I had to stop was so we could do this show today. And the second thing I want to say is, it's definitely an honest book, because there are a lot of times as I'm reading through it that he says, well, I tried to call Rorion Gracie, he didn't call me back. I showed up at his gym, I pitched him this idea, he didn't really seem to care. He's over and over saying again, I had this great idea in my pocket, I was trying to get other people convinced, and they weren't listening. I had to sell it and sell it and sell it again. Right,
absolutely. And I wasn't going to be a part of a book that was, hey, I'm Art Davie, I created the UFC, aren't I great, this is how I did it. The reality was this was not destined to succeed, this was destined to fail. Everything that could go wrong continued to go wrong, and yet Art Davie persevered. Yeah. And what was amazing to me was not that the non-martial arts community, I wanted to say fight community, but there was no such thing as a fight community in the early 90s, it was a martial arts community. Not that the non-martial arts community was against the idea, the martial arts community was against it. Jim Coleman, who was the editor of Black Belt magazine, spoke to Art and he said, I'm not doing a story on this. He said, this is dirty fighting. He actually used that term. There's so many big names in the martial arts space, from Bart Vale to Dennis Alexio to Benny the Jet Urquidez, flat out turned Art Davie down. Stephen Lopez, from Taekwondo, gold medalist 1992 Barcelona for the U.S., turned Art Davie down. So many boxers said this is ridiculous. I'm not getting involved with that. Nobody thought that this was a good idea. Art Davie essentially wound up getting his fighter, Steve, because He wound up buying ads in magazines like Black Belt and Kung Fu and Inside Karate, and soliciting fighters to send in their applications. And that's really where he wound up finding the 8 tournament fighters and the 2 alternates.
I guess it's ironic to me that Benny the Jet Urquidez would turn him down, considering one of the most famous, Gracie Challenge fights of all time was Benny the Jet Urquidez. It's like, wait a minute, you ought to know what this is all about. You ought to be on board from day one.
And we tell the story in great detail about the whole feud with Benny the Jet Urquidez and Rorion Gracie. And, one thing is clear is that, I personally believe, probably even more so than Art Davie does, that Art Davie created the sport of MMA. But what we certainly would never say is that Art Davie created mixed match fighting, because there was a long history of mixed match fighting. Okay. And Art Davie talks about his inspirations. It goes back to pancration from the ancient BC Olympics in Greece, and even modern examples. We write a lot about Judo Gene LeBell versus the boxer Milo Savage in 1963, Muhammad Ali versus Antonio Inoki in 1976, even though it was probably or most definitely a work. Andre the Giant versus the boxer Chuck Wepner, part of that card at Shea Stadium in 1976. We talk about Vale Tudo and the Gracie Challenge and catch-as-catch-can wrestling. There were all of these things that were out there. Art Davie was the man who brought them all together, combined the ingredients, threw them in the oven, and out popped the sport that we call mixed martial arts. So you saw all of these one-offs, including the great history of Vale Tudo in Brazil, but it never formed into anything. And, we write in the book, Vale Tudo wasn't a fighting style as much as it was a meeting place for fighting styles. It was never fully organized. Sometimes, you would have Vale Tudo in Brazil and it was on nationwide television and 20,000 people would pay. And sometimes it was held on a beach or in the back of a dojo. There was never an organization on Vale Tudo. And when you did have one-off fights like Judo Gene LeBell and Milo Savage, it was just one fight on the card. It never went anywhere. It never turned into anything.
Right.
And what I believe Art Davie did, right, with the Ultimate Fighting Championship, he brought them all together and he put them under one roof, under one name, and he launched MMA.
And from the book, you can see that was formed from very early experiences in his childhood when he had, a little tussle where he got into a scrap with a friend of his who had brought a wrestler over. And he thought, well, I got some boxing experience. I train at the gym. I'll punch this wrestler before he can even get to me. And then he ends up on his back in the sand and the guy is squeezing on him. And he's like, why can't I move? How did I not hit him? What am I doing on my back? Why can't I get up? And that early experience, you can see, shaped him for even after all those years, after he'd been a marketing executive and an ad agent, that he still had in this idea in the back of his head. He was thinking, why did my style not work? What style is the best style? And that's how Ultimate Fighter came about, is put all these styles in a blender, stir them up, see who comes out the best.
And then and I'm glad you picked up on that. And that shows where there's no posturing or fake bravado. This is a story when Art Davie was a teenager. He was training as an amateur boxer, thought about fighting in the Golden Globes, and he gets pummeled by this wrestler, and it's not easy to write about your defeats. It's easy to write about your victories. It's not easy to write about your defeats in life. This is a true, honest book. We talk about the mistakes. We talk about the failures. We talk about the embarrassments. We also talk about the triumphs. People who deserve credit get credit. People who don't deserve credit, well, we expose them for a lot of falsehoods they've told over the last 21 years. There are people like Greg Harrison and Jim Cusson who are the true inventors of the octagon. We say their name, their full contribution. We talk about people who played key roles in this. Somebody like Sherry Santos, who ran the office, or Kathy Kidd, who was a marketing executive for Art Davie, who we later married. These are people who are simply unknown, even to hardcore MMA fans. But we put it out there. These are the people. It's easy now for people to say, I did this, I did that. There are a lot of people out there. Oh, I'm the true founder. We put it out there. A lot of people were involved at the beginning, but they had various degrees of interaction and contributions. And some have been greatly exaggerated, through self-promotion over the last 20 years. And other people have remained very, very quiet. We talked about the role of John Milius, and I was really proud of the fact that John Milius' son, Ethan, who's in the district attorney's office in Los Angeles, read a rough draft of the book and told me he blasted through it in a day and a half. And I said, is there anything that seems false to you or doesn't work? He said, no, you captured my father perfectly. Don't change a thing. That was a huge compliment to me. You know, the real contributions are out there. What these people did, and I think more importantly, what a lot of these people didn't do.
I think the thing that strikes me as I'm reading the book is how many of the people that came into the early UFC days were just people that coincidentally happened to be training at that gym in Torrance the same time that he was training there when he became student number one, and Rorion Gracie just handed him the card and said, here you go. And then he ended up working out with guys like John Milius and Big John McCarthy, who were all there training at the same time he was.
Yeah, I told Art writing this book, and I'm glad you picked up on that. I said, you know, if you had grown up in Kansas City or you found the gym in Kansas City, this wouldn't be that interesting of a story. But all of these characters and known people who are cycling through, they're right. Like John McCarthy was just a jiu-jitsu student, and John didn't start refereeing till UFC 2, but John is there at UFC 1. Not only is the main training partner for Royce Gracie, but he's also a bodyguard for Rorion Gracie. And we talked about this in the book. Hailson, who was one of Carlos Gracie's sons, so it was the first cousin of Rorion Gracie. There was a huge dispute over the famous Gracie Triangle and Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and a trademark. And Rorion was actually afraid that Hailson was going to show up in Denver and shoot him. So John McCarthy, who was an LAPD officer, was told to bring his gun, and aside from being the training partner of Royce, he was there to make sure Hailson Gracie didn't show up and try to shoot and kill Rorion Gracie. I mean, that's just incredible stuff. You can't make that stuff up. And, you know, I did a lot of verification on that. I didn't want to get a nice cease and desist from any lawyers, and
right.
Independent verification, you know, a true story. I mean, crazy stuff circulating all around this. And the fact that John Milius, who directs Conan the Barbarian, and he's involved in that, and just the names that cycle through, and the fact that Ken Shamrock shows up in this thing, and the Plas Gym, which is the most famous Muay Thai gym in Holland, if not all of Western Europe, Art Jimerson out of boxing, just crazy. All of these elements that came together for the first UFC. And, you know, you can't put that toothpaste back in the tube, because now we have the MMA culture, not just the MMA sport, but the MMA culture. But you literally aren't getting guys from different planets. You're getting guys from different universes. You know, you have lifelong martial artists, multiple degree, multiple stripe black belts, who have never heard of Brazilian or Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. That's how isolated everybody was in that era in the late 80s and early 1990s. It's unthinkable now.
To that note, I think it almost would serve well to make a full-length feature documentary out of this book and show, you know, with you and Art Davie providing the narration and telling the stories, like, hey, you know, this is what you people need to know that never realized where all this stuff came from, the Octagon, the Gracie family, the organization, the people that went into it, how it evolved. You know, make a feature out of this, and who knows, maybe that could even end up on UFC Fight Pass.
Well, you know, I'm glad you say that, because we actually have received a few calls, people wanting to do a documentary, and a couple of people inquiring about buying the rights for a feature film. So, hey, we're open to anything. It lends itself definitely to that, you know, because it's the real story. And early on, Art and I talked about how do we position this book, and one of our early thoughts was, let's interview like 40 or 50 people and get their version. And then we also talked about, maybe I write this as me, as Sean Wheelock, from a journalistic perspective. But then I thought, you know, Art, you were there. You brought in everybody. The Gracies played a huge role, especially Rorion. But you brought in the Gracies. You found Rorion. Rorion didn't find you. Art read an article in Playboy magazine by a writer named Pat Jordan. It was entitled Bad. And Art Davie realized that this famed Gracie family lived about 20 miles from his office in Southern California. It was before the Gracie Academy in Torrance, when the Gracies were teaching out of their garage. Art Davie was student number one at the academy, but there were hundreds and hundreds of students at the garage who just hadn't had their memberships transferred over yet. And again, just a fluke. What if Art had been in New York? Well, he's probably not going to get on a plane and fly 6 hours, but he can definitely drive 20 or 30 minutes to meet these people.
And then his office, when he had the TDMG office, was like a block's walk away. He could walk over to the Torrance gym.
That's exactly right. Just this weird, almost serendipity. It's just these weird things that come together. And I think if you look at any origin stories, you're going to see things that are just amazing coincidences and almost lightning strikes that probably wouldn't be repeated. And I think if you look at how Apple came together or how General Motors came together or Sony, you would probably see various moments of serendipity like this and just flukes, quite frankly. And that's what you see in the creation of the UFC. And that's what I think that we really spell out in our book is exactly how these people came on. But Art and I decided, Steve, that we wanted this to be through Art Davies' eyes, through his voice, because he was there. He was the one who found the fighters. He was the one who found the Gracies. He found John Milius. He found Semaphore Entertainment Group with Bob Meyerowitz and Campbell McLaren. These people didn't find him. He found them. He's a snowball rolling downhill, and he's picking up all these people along the way and getting bigger and bigger. But the origin of that snowball is Art Davie at its core.
If you want to get the entire story, all I can say is go get that book. It's available in bookstores everywhere, on Amazon for a little bit cheaper if you want it. But Is This Legal? With Art Davie, written with the help of Sean Wheelock. It's a great book to learn not just what the sport was, but how it came to be the sport that you know today.
Steve, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it, and great to talk to you about Bellator and about my book. Thank you.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Thanks, Sean. I always appreciate getting the chance to catch up with you and